Hi everyone, and welcome to night 2 of the SAT crams. Today we'll be going over the writing and language section. And if you haven't already seen Cosette's message, make sure you go ahead and answer that poll telling us how you're feeling tonight. Hopefully it's a lot of super slays and not that much tired. But if you are tired, I get that. My name is Rashi. I'll be one of your hosts for tonight.
Hi, I'm Krista, and I'm going to be your other host for tonight, and I'm super excited to be here and teach you guys writing and language.
And as always, make sure you're following at Fiveable on social media. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram. Just today I saw I think it was like, what AP subject are you? And then based off of that, it would tell you like what your Christmas gift is. So lots of funny content on there. And then there's so many helpful and useful videos on YouTube explaining so many great concepts. And finally, we're also on the LinkedIn in case you guys want to boost your LinkedIn connections. So make sure you go hit that follow button over there. As always, some quick community agreements. Making sure that we're all being respectful today, as we're here to learn in a safe space. Everyone should receive the same opportunity to learn. Making sure that we're being supportive, lifting each other up, no matter how tired or angry or whatever is going on in your life, like we're all here to help you out. And then please be patient with us as we have a limited amount of time together. This cram will be from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Central, or I think 7 to 9 Eastern, no matter where you are, 2 hours. And lastly, be kind. We're all real people here. So a quick agenda for today. We just finished the welcome section, and then we'll go over to an intro to writing and language portion. We'll talk about command of evidence, words in context, expression of ideas, and standard English conventions. And so these are the 4 main topics that the writing and language section will test you on. And we'll end with some Q&A and extra practice. But like always, if you guys have any questions, please drop them into the chat or into the Q&A section so that we can go ahead and answer those as the cram progresses. So let's begin with the basics of the SAT writing and language section. So the format is 44 questions, and there's 4 passages, so approximately 11 questions per passage. And there's only 35 minutes for this section, which means you get 48 seconds per question. And this is including your reading time. So that this section is very much like how quickly can you read and understand the information. It's testing you very heavily on that. And there's 2 main types of questions on the exam. The first one is this expression of ideas. And so that gets broken down into 3 components: development, organization, and effective language use. The second type of question that you'll see are standard English conventions. And this also has 3 main components: grammar, sentence structure, and punctuation. So we'll go into these in a bit more depth. There's also 4 main types of passages that you'll see on the writing section. So this is kind of similar to the reading section if you guys were here yesterday as well. The first one is careers. So these will cover major jobs, trends, and problems, and these can sometimes have an added chart or an infographic. You'll also have the history/social studies passage type. And so this covers geography, psychology, economics, law, or other aspects of social science. Sometimes you'll have a passage on current news or any recent studies in the field. Then you'll have the humanities section. So this will cover English and the arts. And it's often the subject of persuasive or informative essays. And lastly, there's science, which covers natural and computer science. And this is the most likely passage type to have a question about graphs. You'll often see like a bar chart or a line chart, and a question will ask you to analyze or make sure that the chart is like in the correct spot of the passage. So let's get into our first topic, which is command of evidence. So command of evidence is broken down into 4 main sections, and it involves finding supporting details in passages that back up the answers you choose. It tests your ability to understand and interpret textual evidence within both individual sentences and across the entire passage. So in essence, it's about how well can you pick out the proof from the passage that makes your chosen answer correct. And it has these 4 key components. The first one is determining what the best evidence is for questions asked or conclusions. Second one is making sure that you can interpret the data that is given. So taking data from informational graphics and drawing the correct connections between the data and the passage itself. You also have understanding how the author of the argument uses or fails to use the evidence in the passage. So sometimes you might have like, why did this author, or what is the correct interpretation of this data, or fix this author's interpretation? That's oftentimes a common question that you can have for the understand portion. And lastly, you have revise. So this is testing you on your ability to strengthen, support, and clarify information in a passage. So let's go over some strategies for this section. The first one is looking at key phrases. And so some of these key phrases would be phrases like the author states, according to the passage, evidence that supports. These all tell you that this is like a fact of the passage, or the fact that the passage is giving you. And you also want to look out for statistics or any citations, whether that be a researcher, author, another human, another professional or expert in the field. A great idea is to mark these phrases with a symbol while reading or underline them so you can easily reference them later, because the SAT loves to throw these facts at you with lots of like technical jargon and then test you on it immediately right after, seeing how well can you understand what these facts mean. So if you have these underlined, it's very easy to just flip back, immediately find the fact. Second key tip is to eliminate irrelevant information. So irrelevant information is any information that doesn't directly relate to the passage, or like in answer choices, like your distractor answer choices. These are most likely bad answers, and it's something that you can very quickly just cross out so that you don't have to deal with later. A very important part about eliminating irrelevant information is making sure that you're keeping the main argument in mind. Sometimes it's very easy to look at the answer choices and start just like crossing things out, but you should only delete information that's distracting you from the main argument. If it connects back to the main argument, keep it there. And be bold in rolling out information that's loosely related. Be confident. If you think something's a distractor, it most likely is. You've read the passage, you've done the work. There's no point in having answer choices that you're like, oh, like I'm like 2% sure this could be. Just strike it out in that case, because you don't have the time to sit there and be like, oh, let me like find the textual evidence for every single answer choice. If you think it's a distractor, cross it out. So an excellent tip for this section is to pretend that you're the author of the passage and ask yourself if you would use this information in a high-stakes research project. Does it have the factual backing that would support being used in that scenario? So let's go through a practice example together using these strategies. Sorry, I'm like recovering from a cold right now, so you're gonna hear me cough a few times. But the first key, this question is asking which statement best supports the statement above. So it's given us this paragraph about, oh yeah, I'm gonna grab some water. You guys take this opportunity to read the question. Okay, so this question is asking which statement best supports the statement above. So we've been given this paragraph, and then or answer choices about this paragraph on soup. So first key tip, let's mark our key phrase. It says, according to Box, a leading Greenland expert, which means that this statement is going to be treated as a factual statement from the SAT. Second thing is to eliminate irrelevant information. So when we read the answer choices here, the first one is talking about how soup particles facilitate melting and limiting like the ability of snow to reflect the sun's rays, which directly does relate to the passage. So that doesn't seem irrelevant. The second one is soup particles are bad for human health. Even if that's true, it doesn't have anything to do with the statement that's being presented. So we can eliminate that as a distractor, even though it could be a correct statement. Third one is talking about like soup particles creating acid rain. That could be that does relate to the passage because the passage is talking about giant plumes of smoke and falling as particles. So that doesn't seem irrelevant. And the last one is talking about suit's name and how it has a similar spelling to the word foot. Immediately distractor can eliminate that. And you're automatically left now with 2 answer choices without having to do much analysis. So now that we've eliminated those, we can use our skills to go ahead and find the correct answer. And I'll give you guys a quick second. Go ahead and put into the chat which answer choice you think is correct between A and C. All right, so the correct answer choice here is A, that soot particles facilitate melting by darkening snow and ice, limiting its ability to reflect the sun's rays. And it's A because some key things to note here. It's talking about how soot is falling over Greenland in giant plumes of smoke and then falling as particles onto the ice sheet. So this answer choice in A directly talks about those soot particles. It's directly talking about the impact that these particles have on the ice sheet, which is like a nice transitional, or it transitions very nicely from this statement. But C, on the other hand, is talking about, the compounds in soot, and so it's looking more just into the soot itself rather than its effect on the ice sheet, which doesn't really follow what this statement is saying, which is why the correct answer choice in this case is A. So let's go again and do some practice with reading infographics. We have this infographic here, and before we get into this, I want to go over some tips on infographics. The first main thing is to always look at the labels. This includes your title, this includes your x-axis, your y-axis, whatever information the graph is giving you, even if it has like a caption, make sure that you're carefully reading it. Second thing is to choose the best answer, not just the right answer. Sometimes multiple answer choices will be correct, but you want to make sure that you're choosing the one that matches the graph the best. And then third tip is to consider the main ideas of the passage. If your interpretation of the graph is like the exact opposite of what the passage is telling you, you might want to go back and make sure that you're interpreting it correctly, because the graph is included for a reason, and 99% of the time it's used to bolster or uphold the argument that's presented in the passage. So as we can see, this graph is showing the average daily high and low temperatures recorded at a weather station in Greenland. And this is over the period of about 29 years. And so the question is asking us which choice most accurately and effectively represents the information in the graph. And there is a poll open on the right side of your screen. So go ahead and click on the poll section and answer it so we can see what you guys are thinking. I'll give you guys a few more seconds. All right, so the majority of people voted for answer choice B, and that is in fact correct. Nicely done. So if we look at the answer choices, the first two are very similar. It says like temperatures drop as low as 20 degrees or as low as 12 degrees. The third one is temperatures are dropping to their lowest point on December 13th. Automatically, we can look at the graph and see that like it's just your labels on the x-axis are just months. There's no way you can analyze and see, oh my god, December 13th, lowest temperature. So you can immediately cross that off as a distractor. And then the fourth one is temperatures drop to 10 degrees Fahrenheit and stay there for months, which you can very quickly rule out looking at the graph, because like there's no line at 10 degrees. So finally, we're left looking at like answer choices A and B. But if you guys read your labels correctly, which you did, you can see that the dashed line represents the average daily high. So if you got distracted and looked at this dashed line as the low, that would actually be incorrect, because this is representing the high and the low is 12 degrees Fahrenheit. So nicely done. Let's move on to our second section, which is the words in context section. So words in context is all about understanding the meaning of a word using context clues. And the main objective of these questions is to test your ability to discern the meaning of words based off of the context that they're used in. This isn't about testing obscure vocabulary, and that's oftentimes a misconception with this section. The SAT doesn't really like pull out random obscure words like anachronism or limerence, but instead it's about understanding how the word chosen or word choice can affect tone, style, and meaning within a passage. And these questions typically involve a passage where a particular word or phrase is underlined or highlighted, and then you'll be responsible or asked to choose the best replacement for that word, or a phrase from a list of options to replace. Maybe like the word just doesn't fit in the context, and so it's like, choose a synonym that would better replace this word. But you can also be asked to identify how the word is being used in the context of the passage. What impact does that word have on the tone or the style? So this tests not just vocabulary, but also context. So an example question is here on the right. The sentence is, the Harvey House, the menu was modeled after those of fine restaurants, so the food was leagues beyond the sinister fare travelers were accustomed to receiving in transit. And it's asking which choice best maintains the tone established in the passage. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a poll just so we can test out. Wait, okay, yeah, poll is open. So go ahead and answer that. Which answer choice do you think in this case is correct? So I'm seeing a bit of a split between A and B. Let's analyze this a little bit further. Okay, so the word sinister, all of these, or sinister, surly, abysmal, and icky are our four choices. And the first thing we can see is that these are all like very similar words. They're all synonyms, where they have that like negative connotation. But the second thing we can tell is that the style of this passage is like a formal style, it's a formal tone. And so we can immediately rule out the word icky as a distractor choice. So now we're left with three answer choices: sinister, surly, and abysmal. The word is sinister, however, has like this, when I think of sinister, I think of like a villain, a Disney villain. It has that like negative connotation where it's more implied towards evil or willing to do evil acts, I guess. And so it doesn't really fit into the sentence because it's talking about like travelers receiving not excellent quality food in transit. They're not like receiving evil food. So we can so no change, or option choice A in this case, is incorrect. But surly as a word also kind of generally implies that someone is upset or grumpy. And so that doesn't really fit into this answer choice here as well, because surly is more of an emotional word, but this is just describing food. And that's how leads us to actually answer choice C, abysmal, which is the correct answer choice in this case. Because abysmal is referring generally to objects, and it just means like a poor object, and which matches the poor food that these travelers are used to receiving. So I know, a bit of a difficult one, but yes, the correct answer choice in this case would be C, abysmal. So let's do another practice question. I know that one was a bit difficult. This phrase is, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want for a wife. So go ahead and take a few seconds to read the question and the answer choices. As always, a poll is open up on the right. Also, even if you are uncertain about your answer choice, I really highly recommend answering the poll anyways, just because then maybe, like, even if you are incorrect, it tells us that we should spend a little bit more time and explain why that answer choice is incorrect and help you get to the correct answer. So you might think, oh my God, like everyone else is putting answer choice B, I think it's answer choice C. Go ahead and put C because there's a possibility that everyone else might be incorrect. I highly recommend answering these questions. And if you want us to go over a question again, just let us know in the chat and we will be more than happy to. So I'm seeing a lot of responses for answer choice A. That is in fact correct. Nicely done. Really quickly looking at this, these answer choices, A and C both really fit the tone, but crave is more of like a word that you crave food. You don't crave a person. So you can kind of strike that out just because contextually it doesn't make sense. And when you want something, you're not demanding it. Demand is a very strong tone, so it doesn't fit the tone of this sentence, so you can cross that out. So then you're left with two words or two answer choices left, desire and fancy. When we substitute it, a single man must desire a wife. A single man must fancy a wife. Fancy doesn't really mean, or fancy, while it is a synonym, doesn't really fit the context here because it's a very like delicate word. Like, oh, I wouldn't fancy that. But these men are in want for a wife. They desire a wife. That fits much better contextually and tone-wise into the sentence. So let's talk about some tips and tricks for the words in context section. The first one is that context is always key. Always look at the broader context of the passage, not just the immediate sentence, to determine the meaning or appropriate word choice. And in this case, you want to read around the word. So don't just focus on the sentence with the highlighted or underlined word. Read this sentence before and after to grasp the overall context, because the surrounding sentences can oftentimes provide like crucial information regarding the word's correct meaning or about the intended tone. So first tip, read a sentence before and after. Second one, understand the nuances of the word. A lot of words can seem synonymous, but they'll have slight differences in meaning or connotation, which is what we've seen in the past few practice questions. So it's essential that you choose the word that best fits the specific context in the passage. Don't just choose a word that's a synonym, because the SAT is including these words that are close synonyms, but slightly different connotations. In the case of demand or crave or want, you need to choose the word that fits best in the specific context. And so a great tip I have for this is when you predict your answer before you choose it. So before you look at these answer choices, try to come up with your own word to fill in the blank or a given spot, because then you'll know exactly what type of tone or style of word that you're looking for. And you can also, that allows you to quickly eliminate answer choices that are there to distract you, that synonymically I don't think that's a word, but that are very close, that are synonyms to the word that you're looking for. So, second tip, look for comparisons or contrasts and the positive or negative descriptions of the words and see how well your answer choice matches the given context or the given nuance. And third tip is to pay attention to tone. The tone of a passage is very important in giving you clues to what word fits the best. And by tone, we mean, is the passage informally written or is it formal? Is it a positive or a negative tone? Just deciding like the formality and the, I guess, positivity of the passage goes a big way in deciding what answer choice would be the best one. So a more formal passage will require a more formal word choice. So being mindful of both tone and purpose provides hints about which word or phrase is most appropriate, but it also helps you very quickly eliminate like clearly wrong answers. It can be easier to spot an answer that doesn't fit than to identify the correct one immediately. And we can see that in these cases where we first go ahead and eliminate the distractors and then look for the correct answer. Because once you have less options, it makes the task much more manageable. But my favorite tip, I think, would have to be just replacing the word. Pick an option and then just put it into the sentence and read that sentence in your head. And if it doesn't sound right, if you're like, well, it seemed great on paper, but reading it out loud or reading it in my head doesn't make it fit or makes it seem like it's just wrong, then it's probably wrong. Go with your gut instinct. Don't overthink your answer choice. If it doesn't sound correct in the sentence, it's most likely wrong. Choose another answer. But maybe you have some extra time to kill, or you skip this question and you're like, let me go back now that I have like 10 minutes left on this reading writing section. If you have time, and I know like your SAT, if you're here, it might be in 3 days, but if you guys have time, these are two great ways, two great long-term strategies to help you go over the words and context section. And the first one is just to read. I know, wow, reading, really original, but it's true. Consistent and varied reading, and so this means not just like articles, but books across various genres or essays. Um, Doing these various types of reading leading up to the SAT helps improve your vocabulary, and it also helps improve your ability to discern word meanings from context. I hate reading nonfiction. I mean, like it just gets to be so boring. But before my SAT, that's what I did. I would read nonfiction passages, and very quickly I was able to identify, like, okay, they're throwing these technical words out, but looking at the context, I'm able to figure out like a general meaning of what it is. A second great tip is to learn your roots, prefixes, and suffixes. If you're unfamiliar with a word, break it down into its root, and any prefixes or suffixes can help you figure out its meaning. And you can learn these by getting a book of common Greek or Latin roots and practice identifying them in common words. And this will help you decipher unfamiliar words when they show up. So we are going to do some words and context practice. You have a passage, you have a question, and you have a 1-minute timer. There is also a poll open. So I'm going to set the timer and I'll see you guys once the minute is up. Okay, the 1 minute is up. Go ahead and take 5 seconds to answer the poll. Just like what I said before, even if you're uncertain, I highly recommend answering the poll. It just tells us what people are thinking and helps us explain the answers better. So I'm seeing an equal split between A, B, and D. We'll spend a little bit more time going over this question then. So this question gave us an excerpt from a novel, and it's following the life of a governess who is working in wealthy British households. The question is talking about the last sentence. It uses the phrase, "This was a weakness I did not often indulge. My employments were too numerous, my leisure moments too precious to admit of much time being given to fruitless lamentations." And it's asking us, what does admit of most likely mean? And the correct answer choice here is B. So let's look at this in a little bit further. As we know, the words and context section doesn't just test us the real meaning. Doesn't just test us the dictionary definition of a word, it tests us the real meaning of it within a sentence. So let's take the phrase admit of. In isolation, without any context, you could think that it's like acknowledging or confessing to something. I will admit blah, blah, blah. But in this provided example, in this context, it's more synonymous with allow or tolerate. I will allow myself to, in her case, break down into tears. So it's clear that when we're looking at these types of questions, this vocabulary in context questions, you need to look at the context and the most fitting meaning of a word within that particular sentence or paragraph. Here, it's the sentence before that gives us the most clues for this correct answer choice. Because the sentence before implies a situation where the subject is too occupied with tasks or thoughts to indulge in this luxury of feeling sorry for herself. Now that we have this context in place, the word want doesn't fit because the context doesn't suggest that the speaker lacks the desire to feel sorry. It's actually that she doesn't have the time or the emotional space for it. So we can rule out want or answer choice C, which you guys were able to do. Now let's move on to the other answer choices. So A is necessitate, and necessitate as a word means something must happen, which isn't correct here either. And forbid means that the speaker is stopping herself from feeling these emotions, but she's not stopping herself. It's just that she doesn't have enough time to give to it, so she's like putting it off. But sometimes she does indulge in this. So it's not like she's forbidding herself, it's just like sometimes she'll allow, sometimes she won't. And so that leads us to the correct answer choice of B, tolerate. The speaker isn't tolerating too much time being given to crying because she has so much work to do. So let's go over, this is an old text, which makes it a little bit more difficult to analyze the words in context here because you oftentimes haven't seen many of these words or phrasings before. Some hints for reading old text would be literary exposure. If you have the time, read as many works from the period, whether it's literature, newspapers, or letters. The second words in context practice that we did was directly from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Highly recommend reading that novel. Over time, you'll start to recognize and understand common words and phrases that repeat within these old texts. Etymology, or understanding the origins of words, is also an excellent idea. A lot of online dictionaries will provide etymological information, but also learning the prefixes and suffixes of words would directly help here. Sometimes what's best would be taking a word and finding a comparison with modern English. So older vocabulary oftentimes has modern equivalents, or it's like evolved into a word that we use commonplace. If you can find that connection between the old and the new and remember it, that'll directly help you out when looking at the word in this contextual experience. But maybe you don't like to read. And in that case, I have the perfect tip for you. Watching period dramas like films or TV shows set in these periods can introduce you to this vocabulary and the context in which they're used. Bridgerton on Netflix is a great one to watch, especially if you're not fond of reading these long novels. And lastly, of course, contextual understanding, paying attention to the context in which the word is used. Even if you don't know the word immediately, the surrounding sentences or paragraphs can offer hints. So let's do some more practice. Again, another paragraph, another question, another poll, and the 1-minute timer has begun. All right, that's time. Go ahead and answer the poll. I just saw like someone put in their vote and then immediately took it back. Even if you're uncertain, again, choose the answer choice that you think best matches. There's a possibility you're correct, and in that case, that's great. But on SAT, I mean, the worst thing you can do is leave a question blank. You're not going to get any negative deductions for answering it incorrectly. And so, best case scenario, you answer it, you take a guess, and it might end up being correct. All right, I'm seeing an equal split between A, B, C, and D. So let's go over this question. This passage is an excerpt from a novel by Virginia Woolf, which was published in 1919, so more of our humanities content. It's giving us this line in the middle of the paragraph, and it's asking us, what does mistress most nearly mean? And if you chose answer choice B, you are correct. I can see a lot more of us chose answer choice D. Totally okay. Let's go over this a little bit more. In this paragraph, you have Catherine Hilberry, and she's in the middle of this social setting, pouring tea for a gathering. So the word mistress in this situation doesn't really refer to its conventional or stereotypical meanings. Instead, within this scene, it's implying that Catherine is the one overseeing or controlling this social gathering. She's more the role of a manager or someone in command. And when we look at this context, particularly the sentence after, where it's like a single glance shows that she barely needed any help. This tiresome business was very easy for her to do. You can rule out a lot of the answer choices just from that meaning itself. It doesn't make sense that Catherine here is serving as an admirer or a supporter of what's occurring, because her role is more active or central. She is the one doing like the pouring the tea and like hosting the gathering. She isn't, that sentence after doesn't, it tells us that she doesn't need any help from anyone else. Similarly, if you label her as the victim, it contradicts this authoritative position that she has within the scene. So that leads us to choose answer choice B, or manager, as the final answer. This passage is a great example of why it's important to read the whole passage, not just the underlined phrase. Because reading the whole passage here gave us the context that even though it's using the word mistress, mistress in this case doesn't use its stereotypical meaning. Instead, it's more akin to a manager. with that being said, we're now going to move into our next 4.
Awesome. Hey guys, so now we're going to be going over the next topic, and that is going to be your expression of ideas. Hi, Emmy. Okay, let me share my screen really quick with you all. Awesome. So, again, make sure to stay active. I know it's like tiring tonight, but we still have a lot to go over and a lot of practice to do, and you guys got this before your exam. So let's get into it. Expression of ideas. Okay, everyone can see this. Awesome. So what even is expression of ideas, right? That sounds super generic and random and like I wouldn't even know what it is. But it's basically just testing your ability to refine the substance of a writer's message. So this encompasses developing ideas. So what's the proposition? What's supporting it? What's the focus? What's that quantitative information that's being in there? Like, what are the details? What's trying to be conveyed? Like, if I were to say something, if you were to have a conversation with your friend, this would be testing your ability to just like understand what actually happened. Now, the second point is going to be your ability to organize ideas. You're going to have to see logical sequences, right? So orders of events, cause and effects, and then also intros, conclusions, and transitions. So this would be your intro paragraphs, setting the stage, providing context, your conclusion, wrapping everything up, probably restating your points, and having a recommendation or a call to action. And then your transitions, which are going to be moving you from point to point, often with a transition word like however, although, something like that, or maybe not, and you'll just have to see, oh, we're talking about something new. That's a transition. And then finally, the ability of using language. Now, this includes precision, being able to be precise with how things are said, concision, which again, these two kind of, I think, go hand in hand, right? You want to say it in a very concise way, not too wordy, not too much, and get your meaning across very effectively. Style and tone, every author has a different style and tone, so you're going to have to pick up on what this impacts to the writing, right? You can say the same sentence with different tones, different styles, and they can mean completely different things. So using your context to understand that. And finally, syntax, being able to look at the sentences and how they impact each other. Awesome. So hopefully that makes sense for everyone. Again, remember, if you have any questions along this stream, just put them in the chat. But now let's go into our strategies in your idea development. So here are kind of the steps that I think you guys should really focus on, the skills that you should really emphasize. And that's proposition, then support, focus, and quantitative information. So when you're reading things and you need to develop these ideas, you're going to want to keep all of these in mind. These are the different question types, right? And so when you're reading it, I want you to ask yourself these questions. The first one, which is probably the most important in my opinion, is the information directly related to the main idea, right? There can be some distracting information in the passages that you were given that aren't really relevant. They're just a random fact, like a random fun fact, something that is not directly contributing to the main ideas and the main points. And oftentimes this detail can be fun, it can be fluff, especially in creative writing. However, for the purposes of this exam, those details aren't going to be important when you're not being tested on it and it's not related to the main idea. Next, you're going to see if the information contains relevant aspects. So that's kind of similar to the first one in the sense that, okay, maybe it's not directly related, but the information is going to help build upon those ideas. It's going to be a contributing factor. It's going to be a piece of evidence you can use, or maybe draw a correlation, or maybe come up with some sort of analysis that connects the points together. Those can be also important. The next point that you need to ask yourself when you're given these question types is, does it bring new and loosely connected to the primary idea information? So again, this is all based on like building upon the main idea. So I want to make sure when you guys read everything, have a main good concept, really try and understand the main purpose and the main topic of what the passage is about. Because from here, this next point is, okay, are we getting new information? Like something that hasn't been discussed before, and is it loosely connected to the primary idea information, right? Maybe we see those some sort of connections. It may not be direct, it may not be necessarily relevant, but it could possibly be connected. That's something else that you can do to check yourself. And then finally, does it support the data? So what we can tend to see is that oftentimes the arguments are going to follow that logical train of thought, right? everything's going to be supporting each other. There may be a counter argument which goes against it, but that's often followed by a counter to the counter, which is, again, something else that supports the data. So everything hopefully should be linked together in some way, and it's your ability to be able to identify what's being linked together and understand what you have to do with that. So hopefully you guys have that skills. I think my biggest tip for doing this is to really pretend I'm the author. If you were the author, how would you connect these things? What would you be thinking? Is this information relevant? And when you take that perspective, you take that point of view, it kind of helps engage your brain while you're reading. And also, you can be like self-editing your writing, right? That's something you do as an author. So you can understand the ideas, you're understanding the development, and you're also understanding what points may not necessarily be relevant to what you're talking about. So let's do a little practice. You guys are going to have, actually, I'll read it and then give you a minute to do it, and hopefully put your answer in the poll. So, the movement called the Great Migration would transform urban America and recast the social and political order of the country as a whole. In particular, Detroit, Chicago, and other Midwestern industrial cap cities experienced significant demographic changes. Which choice most effectively sets up the examples discussed in the following sentence? So you guys have a minute to reread, think that through, and again, answer the poll. And don't be afraid if you're wrong, because that's okay to be wrong. I think being wrong is a blessing because it gives you the opportunity to learn and improve. So be wrong now and not on the test. Okay, awesome. I'll give you guys like 10 more seconds to put in your vote. The poll is up. Sorry, it wasn't up right away, but I want everyone to put in their vote so that, again, this is good practice. You guys should all be engaged. I'll give you like 30 more seconds to put in your answers. I want to see some more. So if you haven't answered already, make sure to put that in the poll. Again, I'll give you 30 seconds. I want to see some more answers. You guys got this. Okay, awesome. Let's reveal the answer. So I'm happy to see that a lot of you got this one correct. Now, this is because hopefully if you have any specific questions related to this or any question or anything I talk about, remember you can always ask it in the chat and I'll give you a more specified answer. But since I see the majority of you got this right, I'm just going to give a brief answer for now. So I won't give those specifics unless you guys ask for the help. So which choice most effectively sets up the examples discussed in the following? So here we're going to see, again, the questions we ask ourselves. What is the main idea? So we're looking at kind of social and political orders, right? Where you're looking at what's going on in the world. So I think every answer kind of has that. However, what we're looking at and specifically is going to be like the urban, cities, things like that. So that's why I would rule out D, because that's going to be specifying people, which could be true, it could be loosely related. However, in this specific circumstance, what we can see is that's not going to be the most effective way to set up the example as discussed in the following sentence, because the example is talking about is going to be a specific city. And so given that key factor, we're going to want to have an answer choice that has maybe something to do with city. So B is going to be that best answer, because A wouldn't make sense because, again, as it's stated, is going to talk about the whole country as a whole, but then we kind of zone in on the specific city, right? That isn't the most effective. And then D is everyday life. That's kind of generic and it's not what directly related to what we're going on about. And so that's why B is going to be your most effective and best answer choice. Let's go to our next practice problem. Developing ideas part 2. So I'll read this really quick and then start the timer for you guys to think. Transportation planners perform critical work within the border field of urban and regional planning. As of 2010, there were approximately 40,300 urban and regional planners employed in the United States. The United States Bureau of Labor Statistics forecasts steady job growth in this field, projecting that 16% of new jobs in all occupations will be related to urban and regional planning. Population growth and concerns about environmental sustainability are expected to spur the need for transportation and planning professionals. What choice completes a sentence with accurate data based on the graph? So for this question, I'll start the timer, but you're going to have to use the text and the graph in order to come up with the best answer choice. Awesome, and I want to see everyone put their answers in, so I'll give you guys a little bit extra time to put those answers in, so hopefully we can see some more people, have your answers. You guys got this. I'll give you again an additional maybe like 30 seconds because there's a lot of you in here and not everyone's answered the poll, so we want to see people participate a little bit more. $30 more seconds. Okay, awesome. Let's go on to the next slide. So I see I see some people are changing their answers. So again, let's go to our next, did that change the slide? Okay, there we go. Here is the slide with the correct answer. And I see people are split between C and B and A, but the correct answer is going to be C. So in this one, it's important that we read the graph because we read the passage, right? We can kind of understand the passage, but it's really important to also, it's going to say which choice completes a sentence with accurate data based on the graph. So the graph is a crucial element of what's going on here. So in terms of reading graphs, I think it's super important on the SAT to be able to read every portion of the graph. This includes the titles, the labels of the axes, and just really comprehend what's going on. Let's break it down step by step. So the graph title, Urban and Regional Planners, % increase in employment projected 2010 to 2020. Okay, so we see that the passage excerpt and the graph are directly related. Now let's look at the axes. So social scientists and related workers, urban and regional plannings, total all occupations. And then again, we see the percentages, which are going to be the % increase in employment. So which choice completes a sentence with accurate data based on the graph? So the current sentence is projecting that 16% of new jobs in all occupations will be related to urban and regional planning. So when we look at the graph, okay, we can see like there is that 16% growth for urban and regional planners. However, that is not going to be that new jobs in all occupations will be related to that because again, that's not all of the occupations. However, we can see that again, C is going to be more specific and directly related to both the graph and the passage and your main point. Keep the main point always in the back of your mind. So C says that predicting that employment of urban and regional planners will increase 16% between 2010 and 2020. Wow, that is super specific, directly related to the graph because again, we read the title and we can see, okay, 2010 to 2020, that's stated in the title, the projection, the % increase in employment. Again, we can see that this one directly reflects what's related in the graph. Now, for anyone who is confused about the other answers, let's go through them. A, we already went over A. B, warning, however, that job growth in urban and regional planning was slow to 14% by 2020. So what we can see here is that is not actually Sure, that may be a conclusion you can come to yourself. However, based on the graph and the data in the graph and just the overall context of the paragraph, that isn't going to be your best choice because it's not primarily reflective of the general main idea of the passage. And also, C is going to be, again, the best and most accurate to the graph. So we want something that directly pulls from the graph without having us do our own synthesization. And then D, no one answered that, but again, indicating that 14 to 18% of urban and regional planning positions will remain unfilled. Again, that's not directly related to the graph. We just have to answer what the question is asking us, which is why C is going to be your correct answer. So now let's go on to organizing ideas. So your question types are going to be your logical sequence and then intros, conclusions, and transitions. So the best tip for this, one of the favorites and easiest to remember because it's called RAT, like Ratatouille, Remy. You can think of Remy when you do this exam. But R, you're going to read the whole passage to yourself. Read the passage, make sure you understand what's going on. You just read it, okay? A, look at the alternatives. So here you're going to be looking at what other options there are and you want to understand and comprehend those. And then T, you're going to want to look for transition words. When it comes to organization words, I think transition words are probably your best friend. I think they're a clear sign that, okay, there's a transition going on and you can memorize just a couple transition words to help you, but hopefully it'll be obvious, right? You'll have one topic talking about one specific thing. You'll see a transition word and hopefully following that is going to be a topic about a different thing than your previous thing. So when you see a transition word, this is going to be one of your best friends for organizing. And again, make sure that you also restate ideas, you understand what's going on, and you just have an overall sense of, again, the main ideas. Continue to ask yourselves those questions we went on earlier about being able to relate details and understand what's actually going on. So why don't we do a little practice? Because the best way to learn is, again, by practicing. I'll give you guys a minute to read over this and then answer this question. So you guys got this? Let me start that timer for you. Okay, I'll give you guys like 30 more seconds. Remember, everyone here, it's the best use of your time if you're actively participating in answering the polls. Even if you don't know the answer, just like pick one, because then it tells me you don't know the answer and then I can explain it and hopefully you'll understand and maybe learn some strategies. So I'll give you guys like 10 more seconds, get the answers in so we can see where you're at. Maybe if you need help, if you need a little bit more time on these questions, also maybe note that in the chat and we can run the timer twice or something. But again, we're here to learn, so don't be afraid to get it wrong. But yeah, let's reveal the correct answer. And I'm happy to say that everyone got it right. And for those who are maybe too scared to put it in the poll, I'll give you a quick explanation. So this sentence, where it is now doesn't make sense because it's at the very end. Also, they are now able to perform millions. Okay, they is going to be referring to the subject of the last sentence. So when we're talking about a sentence with Grandmaster Gary Kasparov thinks the new machines is a great invention and intends to use it with his beginner students in the near future. Right here, it's kind of confusing to put that there because it could be about the Grandmaster, it could be about the machines, it could be about the beginning students, and also it's kind of a weird sentence to end things on. It doesn't make sense in the logical flow, so we'll rule that out. After sentence 1 is correct because we've just introduced machines and they can play chess and now they're powerful. Or about, we're kind of setting the stage to implement about how they're so powerful. And this sentence that we're going to put, sentence 6, is talking about how they are now able to perform millions of calculations. See, powerful as they are today, they are now. Those go hand in hand. That is a good sign, a good connection that this sentence goes after sentence 1. Now, the reasoning why it wouldn't be after sentence 2 is because sentence 6 kind of sets the stage for sentence 2, right? They are now able to perform millions of calculations within seconds in order to determine what moves to play. Given that level of computing power, they usually win, right? So the level of computing power is demonstrated in sentence 6, so we can see that this sentence should also go before sentence 2. So we look at sentence 1 and sentence 2 and see that sentence 6 can be nestled really well, really great right in between them. And then the reason why this sentence isn't after sentence 4 is because, again, this sentence kind of gets confusing with the idea. This idea is aimed at novice players who think they'd benefit from a boost in confidence by beating a computer. They could be referring to the novice players. And it wouldn't really make sense for us to be like, they're now able to perform millions of calculations within seconds, right? First of all, that doesn't make sense for a human being. Second of all, we're talking about building confidence and beating a computer. This isn't a logical sequence of events, right? So the correct answer is going to be B. Let's go into our next practice question. I'll start the timer, and again, I want everyone to participate, everyone to answer. If you ever need more time, answer the question, just like let us know. Oh yeah, sorry guys, poll is up now. Sorry for the delay in the poll. I'll give you guys a little bit more to answer this because of that delay and just to get more answers in, so. So poll is up, put your answers in. You guys got this. I'll give you guys like a little bit more time. This is like a lengthier passage, and also the poll was put up a little late, so I want all of you guys to have a chance to answer. Okay, awesome. I'm seeing the votes roll in. I'll give you 10 more seconds. Okay, awesome. So happy to say that the majority got the correct answer, which is going to be C. And again, it's totally okay if you get the wrong answer. Like, these questions aren't easy. The point right now is to learn so you can improve for the actual test day. And it's always okay to get things wrong. No one's perfect. So let's go into the explanation about why C is correct. So what we can see is the question we're answering is going to be, they want a conclusion that states the main claim, right? The main idea, the main concepts of whatever we're given is really important within just like the SAT, right? The SAT writing section and language section really tests your ability to comprehend and understand the main idea of what's actually going on. So we always want to know the main idea. We always want to know what's going on. So C states, rather than focus on art that reflected the volatile present moment, her audience could briefly escape into a simpler time. So the paragraph gives us this context of the American public is struggling to cope with World War II era and social geopolitical challenges, right? So what we can see is, oh my God, they're not like doing well. Things aren't going well. The world is sad. Obviously, World War II, post-life, everything's not doing well. So what we can see is, rather than focus on the art that reflected their volatile present moment, right? If you didn't know what volatile means, my best way to tackle this is to just really process of elimination of every other answer. And also, I think hopefully you can get to that maybe volatile. I don't know if anyone knows any morphemes in here, but that kind of has more of a negative connotation overall. But if you don't, again, process of elimination works perfectly great. So we'll go through that really quick. So no change. The reason why the current sentence isn't going to be your best answer is because, again, it's supposed to state the main claim of the passage. So the success of other artists of the time aren't really related to the main claim of what she's doing in her art. So we can rule that answer out because these ideas of other artists' work and what's happening isn't, again, going to be the main claim of what all of the sentences going before it is trying to get to, right? They're talking about her art and how it's, again, like quaint and a renewal of the 19th century themes, right? And then we're talking about the American public. We're not talking about these other artists at the time, which is also why we can rule out option number D, right? At the same time, artists like Edward Hopper were approaching subjects of American life with more melancholy realism, right? We aren't talking about Edward Hopper and his art. We are, again, talking about painter Graham Moses. Now, the reason why it isn't B is because the answer Moses would sustain a successful career as an artist until 1960 when she died at the age of 101. Right, again, that isn't summarizing what's going on. Sure, it's directly related to her and directly related to she began her career late. However, that's not the main purpose that the passage is trying to convey, which is why your answer is going to be C. Again, it's talking about the contrast of her art to the current societal trends, and also just generally what her art was portraying and why it was popular. So by process of elimination, even if you didn't know what volatile meant, you should be able to get the answer C. Okay, let's go into some more strategies of language use. So your 4 question types, again, the same question types are going to be precision, concision, style, and tone, and syntax, as stated earlier in the start of this section. So the best tips for this is going to be consider the audience who the author is writing for, right? Maybe they're writing for the general public, or maybe they're writing to a specific individual. Maybe they're writing to Congress. Maybe they're writing to a group of very educated people in the field, right? Your tone is going to change based on who you're writing to, if it's formal or casual. So let's say you're writing to a politician, your tone may be a lot more formal than if you're writing an expose in a magazine where your tone may be casual. Again, not just tone, you're going to have to look at diction. The word choice, is it going to be scientific or conversational? Is it going to be, maybe you're writing a proposal for research and you want a lot of scientific words to back up your claims to sound, again, very well researched, very well educated, or maybe you're just writing a diary entry. You don't have to have all these big fancy words with meaning. You don't have to have jargon. You can just write whatever words you want and have words with simpler meanings. Again, also another tip is to always consider the alternatives. Look into what's going on, look into the meeting, and if you're unsure about the answer choices, kind of put them into context and see which one makes the most sense for you overall. And again, my favorite tip is to pretend like you're the author and choose the choices that would best suit your writing. And again, I know these tests can be super boring. I get it. I was also bored doing practice problems, but I think pretending the author can give you maybe a little bit more stake in the game, right? If you were the author, you'd actually care about what you're doing. So if you just pretend, it'll help you. So you guys got this. Now let's go into some practice of using language. I'll give you guys a minute to do this question. Awesome. We're seeing some answers roll in. Give you guys like 10 extra seconds. Okay, awesome. I like to see everyone on the same page with departed. Again, what we can see is we're going to look at the most contextually appropriate word for the situation. Now, the reason vacated and evacuated, we're going to kind of group those a little bit together. They're not going to be the best choice, is because we're talking about a tradition with art. So vacated and evacuated more have that physical sense where they're leaving, they're like going away. And sure, that's true in the sense that they're not following this tradition. However, this isn't something physical, right? The artist isn't actually like running away from the tradition physically, like running from it, like leaving, evacuating. They're not being pushed out. Something's not dangerously happening, forcing them to go. Rather, they're departing from the tradition. And another reason why it isn't retired is because, again, retired in this context, in terms of the tradition, in terms of art, isn't going to make the most sense. So again, I'm glad you guys all saw that it is departed. So now we can move on into everyone's favorite section, standard English conventions. This is something that I personally struggled a lot with before I took the SAT and the ACT. It's just a lot to memorize, but it comes with practice. So let's get into our deep dive on grammar. So what are standard English conventions? So this is going to cover a lot. There's a lot that you're going to have to learn, and hopefully you've done some studying before this, but if not, don't worry. I think you can learn it before the exam, even though it's a little bit soon. You got this. So this is going to encompass your conventions of punctuation, conventions of usage, and sentence structure. So basically everything grammar related. So it's going to be testing your endings of sentences, adding info, showing possession lists and series, mid-sentence additions, all of those punctuation usages, and how and when to use different kinds of punctuations properly. For conventions of usage, you're going to look at pronoun agreement, frequently confused words with different meanings, logical comparisons, and also standard expressions. And for your sentence structure, you're going to be looking at, is this a complete sentence, sentence completion, parallel structure, verb tense, pronouns, adverb, preposition, and placement. So let's go into our next slide and really dig deep into grammar. So identifying the standard English convention questions and general tips. So here are our favorite tips. Shorter answers are usually better. The SAT really emphasizes the idea of concision and precision. I think that's something you should keep in your head when doing any answer choice. So short answers, especially in this section, are going to be the best because, again, the SAT has those values of concision and precision. And yes, I will be explaining parallel structure within the slides, and I can do a deeper dive at the very end for this. So yes, we'll be going over a lot of these grammar points. But secondly, correct answers don't introduce new issues, right? So there's not going to be an issue in the answer. If you see something that might be wrong in the answer, don't choose it. Please don't choose it, right? We want to have the best grammar possible for the SAT. And finally, don't be afraid to pick no change. No change isn't a wrong answer. Oftentimes it can be correct. While you don't want to do it for every single answer, you should do no change when there's no change needed, right? When the original sentence is already good. So now we're going to be going over some sentence structure trouble spots. Okay, so something that a lot of people struggle with, I even struggled with, is modifier placement. Your nouns must be next to their modifiers. So let's look at an example that is wrong. Remember, this example is wrong. This is not right. Do not replicate this. Crushed and brutally pulverized, the chef grabbed the freshly ground pepper. Okay, hopefully you guys sense what was wrong with this, because crushed and pulverized is, the chef is not crushed and brutally pulverized, right? That is going to be the ground pepper, which is why your modifiers have to be next to the correct nouns, or you can have a drastic miscommunication like this wrong answer. So the correct version would be crushed and brutally pulverized, the ground pepper was prepared for the chef. So we want to make sure, again, these are going to be placed in the right position, or you can have a giant miscommunication and have this crushed and brutally pulverized chef, which is not what we want, which is not what happened. Now, another thing to look for, some of the trouble spots, is going to be shifts in pronoun number. Don't get thrown off by collective nouns. I think this one's kind of hard and not as intuitive unless you're told or taught it. So a bunch of bananas uses a singular pronoun, it instead of them, because although there's multiple bananas, the bunch is going to group them. So when you say a bunch of bananas, it is tasty. That's probably not a good sentence, but you kind of get the point. Just because there's multiples of something, if they have that collective noun, they're still going to be treated as a singular pronoun. So another example. That is wrong. Do not replicate this in your test. The Jamesons saw a pack of wolves and admired them from afar. Because again, this one seems natural. It probably seems intuitively natural because humans all the time make these grammar mistakes that have just been common in society. However, do not make this on the SAT because that collective noun pack, the Jamesons saw a pack of wolves and admired it from afar. We have to remember, just because wolves is going to implicate and bananas are going to have this idea of, okay, there's multiples. Because we use that collective noun, we're going to have to refer to this as a sentence statement of pack of wolves. We're going to keep that together and again, use those singular pronouns. So if you see a phrase, blank group of blank, get rid of blank statements and reassess. Now let's go into our sentence structure mini cheat sheet. And here we're going to be touching parallel structure a bit. So here's for that help. So I think this is really important. You now have access to the slides down below. So if you need to review, this is some of the most important and most helpful slides for you guys to review. So sentence structure mini cheat sheet. Here is our little cheat sheet for conjugations. Remember, conjunctions, not conjugations, sorry. Remember fanboys. This is one of the easiest acronyms if you haven't been taught before to remember these conjunctions. So F stands for, meaning because. A stands for and, in addition to. N stands for nor and not. B stands for but, however. O stands for or, either, another option. Y stands for yet, which means but. And S stands for so, which means therefore. So again, fanboys is an easy way to kind of just remember all these words. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And so hopefully you can just memorize this and it'll be easy to refer to. Yeah. Okay. So coordinating connects two independent clauses, and subordinating connects an independent clause and a dependent clause. So here we can see on your left-hand side are going to be the coordinating conjunctions. So again, two independent clauses are basically clauses that can stand sentences that can stand on their own, right? You don't necessarily need one for the other to exist. The sentences are complete and make sense without each other. But when you add fanboys, you can connect these independent clauses. For subordinating conjunctions and transitions, what we can see is it's going to connect your independent and dependent clause. Your independent clause can stand on its own, but your dependent clause isn't a complete sentence without that independent clause attached to it. So remember, you're going to want to use different words for different things. And just refer to this cheat sheet if you're unsure and need to memorize or do some extra practices. But again, there's a lot on this slide because it is your cheat sheet. This is a perfect reference for if you're ever stuck. But the next thing, that little tip we have, is going to be verb tense. So I would recommend that you really pay attention to timestamps. For example, if something happened yesterday, use past tense. But if something is happening today in the present, make sure you use present tense words. So again, or if something's going to happen in the future, make sure you use future tense when you're talking to your verbs. So let's say yesterday I went on a run, or yesterday I went skipping. So I would say yesterday I skipped to class. Or what if I was currently skipping? Today I'm skipping to class. Or maybe it's in the future, tomorrow, right? These timestamps. Tomorrow I will be skipping to class. So again, make sure your verbs align with those timestamps if they're provided. The next sheet that we're going to have, the next little tip, is going to be parts of a sentence. Remember, your subject is going to be your noun. your predicate is going to be your verb, and you want things to be a complete thought. So hopefully you can have those. You need both of those to be a complete thought. Again, remember you have both, so you have that independent clause rather than just a dependent clause. Finally, let's go on to parallel structure. I think this can be really challenging, so make sure you pay attention, go over a couple practices, hopefully, and just here's the biggest cheat for understanding and comprehending parallel structure. So in a list, you're going to really want to make sure that verbs have the same ending, such as ing, ed, or present tense, right? You can say she likes cooking, baking, and eating. That makes sense. However, if she cooks, she's baking, right? Cooks, present tense, baking, those shouldn't be used together in the sentence because we want to make sure that all your verbs are having that parallel structure. So again, when it comes to verb tense, you don't want to mix this present tense, past tense, and future tense in your verbs. You want to make sure they, again, have the same endings. And I think this is the easiest way to remember. You want to make sure if one of your verbs or two of your verbs ends in ing and one is present tense or past tense, you want to fix that last verb so it matches the other two. You want everything to be matching in terms of endings. And hopefully that's a good explanation. I think we have some practice later on with this. So let's go into our first practice. You're going to have, since these are shorter, and again, the SAT is on a giant time crunch, you're going to have 1 minute for the both of these questions. Okay, I just realized I'm not sure if there was 2 polls in the stream. Give me 1 second. Okay, regardless, we're going to move on for the sake of time, but we'll get the poll thing figured out in just a second, so don't worry. So let's reveal the answers. Oh, sorry, give me 1 second. Oh, okay. I don't know why there isn't a answer in the slide, but that's okay. We'll just go over it. So sentence completion. The lion dance requires the strength, grace, and coordination of 2 dancers, both of whom are almost completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo and papier-mâché lion costume that they maneuver. So for this, what we're going to see is, sorry, there wasn't a second poll, and for some reason, I deleted the slide with the correct answer circled, but that's okay. I remember. And we'll just walk through this like we're doing it together instead to give you guys a breakdown of what's going on. So both of whom is what we're going to look at. So both of whom, the lion dancers require the strength and grace of coordination of 2 dances. Okay, we know we're talking about 2 dancers, and we're talking about what they're doing and how they're almost completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo and papier-mâché lion costumes that they maneuver. So let's kind of break this down. So we're talking about 2 people, both of whom, the answer choices are both of whom, of which both of them, or both. So let's read the sentence again and use it with each word choice and see if our instinct kind of tells us what we're doing. This is how I would approach this question. The lion dancers require the strength and grace of coordination of 2 dancers, of which both are almost completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo and papier-mâché-like costume that they maneuver. The lion dancers require the strength, grace, and coordination of 2 dancers. Both of them are almost completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo and papier-mâché lion costume that they maneuver. The lion dance requires the strength, grace, and coordination of 2 dancers. Both are almost completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo and papier-mâché lion costumes that they maneuver. Okay, so hopefully when you read this question, there's one answer choice that kind of sticks out to you a little more. So what we can see is that we can eliminate the answer of dancers both. Because let's think about it. Both is a little bit too not in reference of what's going on in the sentence and sentence completeness. The lion dancers requires the strength, grace, and coordination of 2 dancers. Both are almost completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo, right? We have the comma, and so that doesn't necessarily work. It adds another error to the sentence. So we're going to automatically eliminate number D, answer choice D. Both of them are almost completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo. Both of whom in this situation isn't properly used, which is why we're not going to have the answer choice of A, no change. I believe the correct answer here is going to be both of them, because again, we're talking about the noun, the subject of the sentence is the dancers. So the lion dance requires the strength, grace, and coordination of 2 dancers. Both of them are completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo and papier-mâché costumes that they maneuver. Awesome. So let's go on to active voice, passive voice. Again, sorry that the polls, there weren't 2. So here we can see that active voice is going to be something that's active, and passive is going to be something that's in the past and something that we don't really want in the sentence. So remember, active voice is often preferred in the SAT. So ironically, the success of crowdfunding may weaken overall funding for arts if people begin to feel that paying for the art loved by them is someone else's responsibility. So loved is past tense, is a past tense verb, meaning we don't want that in the sentence. Another thing that we look at is C also has loved, which is a past tense verb, which contributes to passive voice, which we do not want. We want something that's present, something that has, again, that present tense. So let's go through it again with the other 2 options. Ironically, the success of crowdfunding may weaken overall funding for the arts if people begin to feel that paying for the art they love is someone else's responsibility. Now let's look at option D. Ironically, the success of crowdfunding may weaken overall funding for the arts if people could begin to feel that paying for the art he or she loves is someone else's responsibility, right? So because here we can see that we want the present tense, we've eliminated options A and C, and now we're at B and D. However, what makes one correct over the other is going to be that because we're talking about people and someone else's responsibility, and the people is going to be referred to with the pronoun they, not he or she, because again, we are not specifying that gender, and loves also doesn't make the most sense in this situation grammatically. So the correct answer is going to be B. Ironically, the success of crowdfunding may weaken overall funding for the arts if people begin to feel that paying for the art they love is someone else's responsibility. Again, sorry about the polls. We'll have that fixed for the next question. So now let's look at conventions of usage trouble spots. So here's another example of logical comparison. Wrong. Life in the Northern Water Tribe is completely different from the Southern Water Tribe. Correct. Life in the Northern Tribe is completely different from that in the Southern Water Tribe. So what we can see is that we want to make sure that our agreements are correct. So from versus that. So what we can see is the definition of from isn't going to be the best used in this situation. Next, we can see that that is going to be life in the Northern Tribe is completely different from that in the Southern Water Tribe, right? So we're talking about 2 different objects, so we're going to use that instead of from, which is to and from, versus this or that. Now, agreement. Singular nouns he, she, it, etc. go with singular verbs. Is, was, etc. We want to make sure that our nouns and verbs are going alongside and correct with each other. Now next is plural nouns. They, you, we go with plural verbs. Just remember to always keep in mind that we want singular nouns to go with singular verbs because again, we're talking about a singular noun, so we're going to want to balance it out with that singular verb, have that agreement. And so when we have plural nouns, they want to go with plural verbs. So we again have that agreement. So let's look at our conventions of usage mini cheat sheet. Our perfect pairs, these are things that I think is best if you just try and memorize, because again, there's a lot of content and these are kind of hard to just logically know, so you might just have to take a moment and memorize it. So your perfect pairs are either, or, neither, nor, from, to, not only, but also, both, and. So when you see one, you really want to see the other in the sentence. But you also want to watch out. You don't want either to be used with nor, neither to be used with or. You want to make sure that these perfect pairs stay together in order to see the best usage of the grammar. Next is something else that you should look for is pronoun clarity. If there are multiple people in a sentence, she/he should be replaced with a name. Because again, if we're talking about two different girls or two different guys and we say she, we don't know which one we're referring to, which is why we want to have that clarity by referring to people by the name when needed. Now let's go into our frequently confused words. Affect versus effect, there versus there, who versus whom, then versus then, less versus fewer, i.e. versus etc. So these are frequently confused because again, they sound similar, they can be used in similar situations, however, they are different. So again, I would look over these, look over the definitions, and as long as you know this, I think you're going to be solid within the exam. And if you have any specific questions, for the sake of time, we're going to move on, but if you have any specific questions about the definitions of these specific words, please put them in the chat and we can briefly go over them, but I would recommend just looking these up in your own time and understanding the differences. And also don't forget that it is an object or place and there is multiple people. So those you want to, again, keep the differences in mind. So let's go into our next practice conventions of usage. And hopefully this time we have the poll ready and I'll answer that clarification after this example. Also, we're working on getting the polls up really quick, so just give us a moment. There should be 1 and 2, but again, just give us a second. Okay, sorry for the delay. There should be 2 polls, so go ahead. I'll give you guys some extra time and answer the polls now. Okay, awesome. I see the answers rolling in, so let's go over the answer choices for this. So what we can see is currently we have, in the past, such research was limited by the weight and bulk of the fossils, so multiple fossils, as well as its preciousness and fragility. So I see a lot of people pick the answer B. However, we're not going to have B because it's in this situation is going to stand for it is. So if we put that out of its conjunction form into the sentence, it doesn't make the most sense. So bulk of fossils as well as it is preciousness and fragility. So now let's look at D. So again, this is again determining the differences between the three types of theirs, there, and there. So this there isn't in relation to, this is related to a place. So we're not going to have that as well because we're talking about a possessive. We're not going to say there in terms of place. So we can automatically rule that out as well. Thankfully, the answer choice there, C, is going to be your correct answer because again, we're talking about multiple fossils. Look at, so there's multiple fossils, so that's why we don't want its, but instead we're gonna go there because again, there's multiple, and if you remember in the cheat sheet, this is going to go along with that noun that is going to be multiple. There goes with that. So good job everyone on that. And ooh, yay. I love to see that everyone got this next one correct. So yeah. Environmental costs of not composting I can't pronounce things today. All municipalities should encourage their residents either to create their own compost piles for use in their backyard gardens or to dispose of compostable materials in bins for collections. Again, this one's correct, or is going to be this or that, and we're not going to do nor because that doesn't make sense in the context, but again, that doesn't make sense in the context as well, and because we're giving them two options, or is going to be the best choice. So let's go into the next slide real quick. Oh, I see some clarifications in the chat. So less versus fewer. So let me make sure I'm getting this right. So basically what we're going to see is that fewer is going to be used to refer to a number among things that are counted, as in fewer choices or fewer problems. So that's going to be things that may not have this specific measurement, this specific exact thing. However, less is referred to quantity or amount in things that are measured. So that's going to be like time and effort. So less time, less effort, things that have that measured sense. Versus fewer is just going to be, again, number among things that are counted, so choices and problems. And what was the answer to the first one again? Let me go back on my slides really quick. Okay, for determining possessives, it's going to be C there, because fossils, there's multiple. B is not correct, A is not correct, D. So C there. There is in the one C, because again, we have two of the there's in that sentence because they have different meanings. Okay, conventions of punctuations. Here are some trouble spots in possession. So here we can see to show ownership, use an apostrophe. Plural form is usually followed by a verb. Example, the cow sat down to graze. Possessive form is usually followed by a noun. Example, the cat's toy was badly chewed. Plural possessive uses S with apostrophe after the S. Example, the 4 cows' milk made tasty ice cream. You never want to see cows when you're talking about multiple cows, that plural possessive, the S apostrophe, and then another S. That just looks clunky. It's not a grammar rule we follow. So again, if it's a plural possessive, use S apostrophe. So here's a little cheat sheet for that. Now let's go into, oh, hi, Emmy. Sorry. Give us 1 second. Okay, sorry guys, Emmy just hopped in on screen for a little bit. So let's go into our conventions of punctuation trouble spots. So the semicolon is going to connect your two independent clauses, and they should be somewhat related to each other. So again, two independent clauses, not an independent clause and a dependent clause. You want these two sentences to be able to stand on their own. The colon, often confused with semicolon, even though they're very different, the colon is going to mark your beginning of a list or connects two independent clauses. So what we want to see is that colon can do a lot. I usually use it when I'm starting for a list. So we're going to have this colon, the list. But remember, the semicolon and colon can't be used interchangeably because the semicolon only connects the two independent clauses, while the colon marks the beginning of a list or connects two independent clauses. So they do have that slight difference. The dash is going to be used like a comma to separate extra info and is usually used when you want to place specific emphasis on a statement. And finally, your comma is going to separate lists, follow a dependent clause, or separate extra info. Conventions of punctuation here is going to be our mini cheat sheet. So items in this series are separated by commas or semicolons. In a list, only use one type unless listing cities with their countries. So ending sentences, periods or statements or order. Periods and statements or orders. Do question marks and interrogatives? Yes. Use explanation points for strong emotion. Okay, you can kind of see what we did there. Periods are going to be only used for, or primarily used when you have statements or orders. And then your question marks are going to be used when you're asking questions, or maybe something that may not specifically seem like a question, but it is going to kind of try and interrogate you. And then your explanation points are going to be when you're trying to, again, show that strong sense of emotions. Okay, and to answer the question about can a colon connect an independent clause and a dependent clause, what we can see is that a colon, I mean, technically, I wouldn't necessarily say the list followed the colon as a dependent clause, but it technically is because, right, it can't stand on its own. So if we go back, we can see that the colon is going to be marked the beginning, a list, or saying. So you could argue that, sure, I wouldn't call it a dependent clause and put it into that label, but the colon connect an independent clause and something that can't stand on its own, but it has to be a list or a saying. So it can't just be like anything, but if it's a dependent clause that is a list or a saying, then the colon can connect it. And for the semicolon and colon for independent clauses, they can pretty much be used interchangeably, but I often, when in doubt, if it's two independent clauses, usually go with that semicolon, unless, again, it's going to be that saying that happens to be an independent clause, and it's probably better to use your colon. Okay, back to this. Here we can see the non-restrictive or parenthetical info. Commas, dashes, and parentheses, like these, again, we're using these examples in this real-world context, can separate extra info. So we can see that the parentheses usage here, like these, this is given an example, but it's also an extra piece of information that isn't necessary for the sentence to stand on its own. Next, we can see that you guys should use the same kind of punctuation, any kind, to start and end the phrase. So right here, we're going to be using the two dashes. So if you can't use a comma and then a dash, or dash and then a comma, you want to make sure that the beginning and ending of your separation is going to be used by the same phrase. And then finally, extra info needs a pair of punctuation marks, one at either end. So here we've used a dash to add some extra info. We want to make sure that we at least have some punctuation. So another tip is to read each question mentally, emphasizing comma pauses. If a pause sounds odd, remove the comma. So here we want to make sure that, again, we're not overly excessively using commas. We want to make sure that they're purposeful and the pause makes sense in the moment. And the best way to test this is to read it out loud. Okay, awesome. So now we'll be going into some more practice. So let me see if we have both of these polls. Okay, so I'm not seeing the polls, which is fine. So instead, we're going to improvise and put in the chat your answer and label them 35 and 24 so I know which answer you're using for which. I'll give you guys a little extra time just so I can see some more answers start to roll in. Remember, just put your answer in the chat for now instead of doing a poll. And yeah, label them 35 and 24 because there's 2 different questions. Also note that there's like 24 and like 23 and then 35 and 36, so make sure you're like looking at the right one. Okay, awesome. So let's go over the answers. So again, we're talking about 35 in reference to reporters. So it's not difficult to understand why a cash-strapped, understaffed publication might feel pressure to cut teams of investigative reporters. Their work is extensive and time-consuming. So here we can see that there's kind of that like awkward pause. So our options are going to be what's given in the example, which is the dash, your colon, your comma, and your semicolon. So let's kind of look at what's going on. So what we can see is, let's first understand what is following the piece of punctuation. Their work is expensive and time-consuming. So what we can see here is that their work is expensive and time-consuming is going to be a complete phrase, right? That's going to be an independent clause. So let's read the first part again. It's not difficult to understand why a cash-strapped, understaffed publication might feel pressure to cut teams of investigative reporters. Again, here's another example of this is also an independent clause. So what we can see is that both sides of the punctuation mark, the mystery punctuation mark, we'll call it that for now, are going to be independent. So what that can refer to is that most likely C for that comma and that dash is going to create kind of this like run-on sentence that may not necessarily need to be there. Because again, we're not having the transition word, we're not separating that info. These sentences can completely stand on their own, which leads us to our options of B, the colon, and D, the semicolon. And so here, what we can see is that the answers have a slight difference. So what we can also see is that it changes the kind of tense of what's going on with reporters, right? We can see an apostrophe S or just the S. So that's going to be, again, an important piece of information for you guys to look at because we want to make sure that it's going to have the right possessive marker. So let's reread it again to make sure we're getting the reporter's part correct as well. It's not difficult to understand why a cash-strapped, understaffed publication might feel pressure to cut teams of investigative reporters. Their work is expensive and time-consuming. So what we can see here is that, reporters isn't going to be apostrophe S because it's talking about multiple different reporters. So again, it's not going to be one reporter and what they own. So we're going to eliminate, again, 35, we already eliminated, no change. And then the answer of D with the semicolon, which leads us to the answer of B. Again, it's separating 2 independent clauses and reporters shouldn't have an apostrophe. So that is why we're going to choose B with the colon. And then now I see a lot of people got the same answer for 24, and let's go through it again. Court reporters for years have been the record keepers of court, taking sculpturous notes during hearings, dispositions, and other legal procedures. So here, again, C is going to be your correct answer because we want to make sure that we're using the same punctuation to separate each thing. And again, this is going to be your list. So you want to make sure we use commas for all of them. And again, I saw a question about assuming the SAT follows the Oxford comma rule. And from what I believe, it does. So we can assume that it's going to use the Oxford comma rule from what I last recall, but don't be 100% sure. I'll potentially look that up, but I'm pretty sure it does follow the Oxford comma rule. Okay, awesome. So that concludes this practice, but we do have some more practice for you, but we're kind of running out of time. So I think it'd probably be more beneficial to go over some of the other questions. So if you guys have any questions about tips or anything else that needs to be reviewed, maybe put that in the chat. And the Oxford comma rule is basically, so let's say we have a list of 3, shoes, shirts, pants. The Oxford comma rule, I'll just type it out, is going to have that comma before the and. So shoes, comma, shirts, comma, and makeup. I have pants, shoes, shirts, and makeup. However, you can use, some people are anti-Oxford comma, so they would use it in a different way. Oxford. So I have non-Oxford comma would be I have pants, comma, shoes, shirts, and makeup. And you wouldn't use the comma before the and. So no Oxford commas is you don't put the comma before the thing with the and, but the Oxford comma rule is you do have the comma before the and makeup. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, let me go back over the answers. Okay. So the answer for 24 is C. Hearings, comma, dispositions, comma. Hopefully that answers your question. And I can do a quick explanation of what this is again. So basically what we can see is that hearings, dispositions, and other legal proceedings. So we're having a little list and we want to separate the items in the list because they're independent of one another. So hearings, semicolon, depositions, and other legal proceedings, that doesn't make sense when you're using a list. The semicolon should not be used when using a list, especially when separating 2 items in the same list. So we're going to have no change be ruled out. Again, also B also has the option of having semicolons in between each of the different items of the list. So again, semicolons, we don't want to have those, so we're going to rule that out. D, hearings, comma, dispositions, semicolon. We're again want to rule this answer out because it has that semicolon option at the very end, and we don't want to use these semicolons when differentiating the items of the list. So we're going to have C, hearings, comma, dispositions, comma, and other legal proceedings, because this list should be separated by commas because we're not having this list be the 2 different parts. Okay, sorry, I see some other questions I'm trying to get to. Okay, give us 1 second.
Okay, so I am gonna jump in real quick and also help out. Here, yes, both the sentences are independent phrases. They can stand by themselves, but I believe the correct answer is B, yes?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said, Rashi.
The correct answer is B, correct? Just making sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reason why it's B is because the second sentence, the work is expensive and time-consuming, is sort of like, it's the sentence that's being emphasized here. It's kind of given as an example of the reason why like a publication might cut teams of investigative reporters. even though it's in an independent clause, the colon here serves to give that clause as an example statement instead of just having it as a statement by itself. So both sentences are independent because they can stand by themselves. They are full sentences. Their work is expensive and time consuming, has a noun and an action word. But the correct answer is B, using the colon, because in this case, the second sentence is serving as an example. It's not a semicolon because the colon just fits better in this case. It's one of those issues of both answers could be correct, one is more correct.
And then also, I think I mentioned this earlier, but the semicolon isn't right because, again, reporter apostrophe S shows that reporter is like having some sort of possession over something, but that's not the case. We're talking about multiple reporters, so we want to make sure we use that right S, which is why your A, no change, and D is automatically should be eliminated because, again, that apostrophe S is in relation to one reporter's work, but we're actually talking about cut teams of teams should help you identify that there's going to be multiple. So reporters, no apostrophe S. So again, those small details you also want to look for because it's not just about the punctuation. You also want to make sure you don't have that like random other grammar aspect throw off your answer. But yeah, so you guys have access to these slides and all the cheat sheets. So since we're getting close on time, we're going to do our little outro. Remember, this is what we learned. These are the 4 sections: your command of evidence, words and context, expression of ideas, and standard English conventions. So make sure you go over these. If you have any questions, there's a bunch of cheat sheets within the presentation, and there's also a cram finale that's coming up on Friday that you can bring all your questions to. The cram finale will be going over some of the hardest concepts from each unit, so highly recommend attending that because that's probably going to be one of the most beneficial sessions of this stream. And like always, remember to follow Think Fiveable on all social media platforms. We have TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. Here you can keep up to date with everything that's going on and also just have some fun, engaging content about SATs, ACTs, anything basically school related Fiveable will post about. But again, thanks everyone for coming to the stream. Remember to come to the crams and the rest of the streams this week and stay engaged. We have a couple more minutes. I'm trying to see any last questions. Oh yes, see, yeah. Okay. If not, have a good night, everyone. Bye. Oh.